Greetings, theists and non-theists. I am the Atheist Paladin. Now I know some of my viewers don't like it when I do a reply video, and it's even harder to follow when I'm replying to a video that is replying to a video. But I just have to do this. Ottawa replies to Martymer's video on which he is debunking Liam and Craig on Kalam. So he really does it bad. So let's just continue.
This is a video response to Martymer81's video, William Lane Craig is wrong about cosmology. While I am personally not convinced by the Kalam cosmological argument, I think it is a bad idea to allow poor arguments to go unchallenged, regardless of their conclusions. Also, some of these points can also be related to the more Thomistic arguments I find more convincing.
Thomistic as in Thomas Aquinas? I'm only pointing this out or asking so because this becomes important later on.
Let us begin.
Question begging. The universe is the set of everything except God, so God is the one thing that doesn't begin to exist. The argument is logically equivalent to the following. Premise 1. Everything except God has a cause. Premise 2. Everything except God is everything except God. Conclusion. Therefore, everything except God has a cause. Special pleading. In order to avoid an infinite regression of causes, the argument assumes without justification that God didn't begin to exist as well.
This is probably just a confusion regarding the definition of God as used by philosophers. The entire point of these cosmological arguments is to show that something which exists necessarily caused the universe to exist. William Lane Craig does not just assert this, but he provides arguments against an infinite regress, for example. Whether I agree with...
What does providing arguments for an infinite regress have to do with the definition of God? Okay, I know it may have something to do with the Kalam argument, because that's the whole point of Kalam. You just go out of a strange idea here. But the whole idea that the definition of God in this point is somehow strange or unusual, it isn't. Like I asked you about Thomas Aquinas, his definition of God has been the long-standing definition of God in philosophy. Well, at least far as Christian apologetics is concerned. And what Craig defines as the cause of the universe completely lines up with that. So I'm not really sure where you're going with this.
This argument or not is a different story, but it is not special pleading. Now, the typical definition of God is not this flying magic man in the sky, which atheists like to bash. Typically, God is defined as a necessary being.
Right, as defined by Thomas Aquinas, yes. But I don't see how that's really making any difference here. Flying man in the sky, whatever Thomas Aquinas is defined as God, is both completely compatible as far as I'm concerned. But so what?
Meaning to exist. So saying something must exist necessarily to, for example, prevent the infinite regress, and to say God exists is really saying the same thing.
No, it isn't. That's the problem. Just to say there must something necessarily, whatever you call it, as a definite cause of the universe, doesn't have to be God. Now, the Kalam cosmological argument is set up in such a way into which it pretty much restricts only accept a divine personal being as being the only possible cause. That's the attempt of the argument.
We are not just using a different word here.
Equivocation. The universe supposedly began to exist ex nihilo, out of literally nothing, But all things we know of that are caused to begin to exist are rearrangements of pre-existing stuff. The two premises use different meanings of the phrase begin to exist.
You are just assuming here that Craig is talking about ex materia causation, because as far as I'm aware, he has not explicitly stated this. Actually, I just did a quick Google search, and this is what William Lane Craig says himself to this objection. I am using the word cause here simply to mean something that produces something else, and in terms of which that other thing, called the effect, can be explained. Whether it's an efficient cause or a material cause is simply left out of account. So I'm not specifying.
Wrong again. Actually, it is left into account. William Lane Craig loves to talk about causes, particularly Aristotle, four causes, into which the material cause is present. As a matter of fact, when somebody objects to something beginning to exist, the example to which he gives is himself coming into existence. A material thing coming from other prior material things in order to support the notion that things come out of ex nihilo. That's what he does. That's what he does, okay? And as far as what he can do, the only thing that he can do is continue to point to those exact same examples. Continuing to point, oh, a table prior to T does not exist, then T1, the table exists. That's all he can do as far as pointing to empirical experiences. Now, if you want to go even more in depth, Theoretical Bullshit does a video precisely on William Lane Craig's four causes and how he's pretty much picking cherries. So,
find in the first premise what kind of cause it has to be, but simply that they're
incorrect yet again. William Lane Craig defines the cause of the universe to be a personal God, to be immaterial, timeless, changeless, formless, whatever. That's standard definition and all-powerful. This is pretty much the definition of God, which he designed the argument to do from the very beginning. So, yeah, he does exactly that.
Must be a cause. Another way I would put this is to say that...
No, not just that there is a mere cause for the existence of a universe. That there is a cause that is not natural, not within the universe, and not impersonal. And to which he also defines as supernatural. Of course.
Cause, in this example, simply means a sufficient reason. If you end up denying that things require a sufficient reason to begin to exist, then you start having these issues.
Okay. What is the sufficient reason for God to exist? Oh, wait, because you're already begging the question as you've already done, as we already went through. God didn't begin to exist. He's necessary. But if you don't actually make the case on why God is actually special, if you fail to make that case, that is what is called special pleading, which is already dealt with. So, other than just saying, well, it's necessary for the universe to have a cause, is not enough to say that God somehow escapes that, okay?
Regarding why things are not just popping into existence all the time. What?
Let me see. What did Martymer say? Oh, because there's already a universe here. That's the answer. And I've already watched this video a few times, so we already know that you're not going to deal with that whatsoever. That's the reason, because there's already a universe here. I can go into further and talk about quantum physics and talk to you about how the quantum vacuum fluctuations for the particles do come in and out of existence. But their lives are so short. We can barely even notice that stuff. And if you want to talk about things like horses and bicycles, well, not only an antimatter counterpart needs to be created, the more matter that you use, the shorter the lifespan. So if subatomic particles can only last a few fractions of a second, how much less than, according to quantum physics, can a horse shitting on your carpet, as William Lane Craig likes to make an example of, live? Yeah, it's even more infinitesimally small. So that's why.
Why do we even have to give a sufficient reason for why we believe in God if the sufficient reason is not necessary? Denying that we need to use reason is pretty much just the nuclear option in avoiding the existence of God.
Using reason is how do you come to a conclusion about something. It has nothing to do with how things are caused. If a certain thing is not caused by anything, then it's not. It just becomes a brute fact. Just like if the universe is not caused by something to exist, as you imply, or as the Kalam cosmological argument implies, then it isn't. It has nothing to do with not using reasoning. It just would be a brute fact. Now, if you want to show that God is that cause, then you have to do more work.
Fallacy of composition. The universe is not a thing, but a set of things. Even if everything that begins to exist must have a cause, this doesn't have to apply to the set of all such things.
I think your claim that the universe is not a thing is just grasping at straws.
Fallacy of misplaced concreteness. The universe is a set of things. I don't know how you can just simply deny the fact of that. The universe is not a thing in and of itself. And that's how we use language. Even William Lane Craig does this. And theoretical bullshit, as I've mentioned before, goes through the fact how Craig actually admits that. The universe is something that is completely different from the thing which is which is composed of. Okay? So the universe is not the same thing of the things that it makes up, because those things can come in and out of existence, but the plane that we call the universe probably will always be there.
This same argument can be applied to people, as we are just collections of things as well.
Yes, but not self-contained things. The universe in itself is a self-contained. To say there's something more than the universe is not to understand what universe means. Now, of course, we actually have gone beyond with a multiverse theory, but that's only because we only lack proper language to describe it.
So obviously we are not things that we can just pop into existence for no reason. You're making
again, it's a fallacy of composition.
Further mistake, and it's based upon your false understanding of cause as defined by Craig. But
I don't see how things require anything that begins to exist requires a sufficient cause for it somehow change this. If a universe is a set of things, of all things that we know of in the material universe, I don't know how you get to say, well, the universe has to have a cause. Again, because you're saying this because the things in the universe apply to this, what you say. But the universe is special regardless of what you think of it. It is a composition. So you're basically trying to reinforce the fallacy of composition by misplacing the concreteness here. That's just wonderful.
Once you understand that by cause we mean simply a sufficient reason, you should realize there can be no difference between things in this regard.
Okay, what is the sufficient reason for quantum vacuum fluctuations? Now, don't give me the quantum answer, which is probability, because that's the actual answer. Because that's not a sufficient reason. You can only describe that probabilistically. So you actually need to develop a classic physics answer to a quantum physics problem. Good luck with that.
If you say the universe can just pop into existence for no reason, then there's no special reason why only the universe can pop into existence. So there's no...
Actually, he does. But like I said, you don't address this, because there's already a universe here. And I've already gone through the quantum vacuum, so let's continue.
Reason to believe everything else cannot pop into existence. Thus we have obvious issues.
While these objections all work and completely destroy the argument, one thing they don't do is show just how badly you have to butcher physics in order to make the argument. For starters, what does it mean to begin to exist? I don't know, because in physics we don't use that kind of terminology.
And here's your problem. Yes, William Lane Craig uses physics to support the premise that the universe began to exist. However, his argument is a philosophical argument, so you have to understand philosophy to refute it. That should be quite obvious.
That's not an excuse for vague definitions. If you're going to point to a physics answer, you have to use science in order to say this began to exist, then you have to define your terms. Just saying, well, it's a philosophical argument does not get away with the vagueness. If you do not do your work properly as far as the definitions goes on this, then equivocation would be only the natural fallacy that happens in this. You have to define your terms. If you don't, and you don't do that accurately, then whatever you say to, oh, well, see, science proves my philosophical point of premise 1. No, it doesn't. Not until you actually define it.
So, Martymer81 goes on from this to argue about physics, all to come to the following conclusion.
In other words, the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem doesn't apply.
I notice how you actually gloss over the fact that William Lane Craig actually quote mines from a paper he apparently even haven't read. So I'm going to take this as you actually admitting that he actually done that. And as a result, that pretty much opens up a really large hole in Craig's argument. But let's continue.
Well, I certainly have my doubts about this model. The point is that no, we cannot categorically declare that time has a beginning. And if it doesn't, then Kalam falls flat on its ass, because the second premise is not just unfounded, it's downright false. The other possibility is, of course, that time does have a beginning. And for the record, based on my current knowledge of cosmology, this is what I believe.
Okay, so Martymer81 must be confused because, of course, William Lane Craig is only arguing that evidence supports the conclusion which Martymer81 seems to agree with. William Lane Craig...
It is a fair point to show that science does not uniformly show that there is a beginning. It is his opinion that he thinks that there is something of a beginning. What's wrong with that? And since science does not uniformly show that there is a concrete beginning, Kalam fails. Exactly the point that he was making. Now, he'll, of course, go into saying, well, with his beliefs that there is a beginning, he, of course, points to the fact that it makes no sense to talk before that time.
does not have to prove with 100% certainty that the universe began to exist. I'm sure he realizes that science does not provide that kind of certainty. So really,
yeah, no shit. But Craig claims that atheism is intellectually bankrupt when it comes to this. And if it's not a categorical statement that maybe the universe didn't really begin to exist, then Craig cannot make that claim, now can he? But he does. So yes, he would have to prove at least a beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe began to exist according to science. But he can't do that.
this objection is based upon a misunderstanding of what Craig is saying and does not harm the Kalam cosmological argument in any way.
What do you mean it doesn't harm it in any way? If you cannot make a categorical statement that time began to exist, then Kalam falls apart. Hello?
In other words, if time began to exist, it must have begun to exist without being associated with any kind of transition. And that exposes another equivocation fallacy in the argument, in addition to the whole ex nihilo ex materia thing that I've already covered. Premise 1. All things with beginnings with transitions are caused. Premise 2. The universe has a beginning without a transition. Conclusion. The universe is caused. Either that or premise 1 refers to beginnings without transitions, but that would render the argument circular, because as far as we know, nothing but the universe could begin without a transition. I mean, if time doesn't exist, the idea of something other than time beginning to exist is nonsensical. If time does exist, then the beginning necessarily coincides with the system transitioning from one state to another. So we're left with premise 1. All things with beginnings without transitions, in other words, the universe, are caused. Premise 2. The universe has a beginning without a transition, which we already established. Conclusion. The universe is caused, which we already said.
First of all, I've already pointed out that William Lane Craig is not arguing for any particular type of cause, just a cause in general.
Incorrect. That cannot be any more wrong. He argues for that it's not natural, it's not within the universe, it cannot be caused by the universe itself, and it must be personal, and of course it has all the list of what I've already described. He does exactly that, and he says God is the efficient cause of the universe, ex nihilo. He says all this. You cannot get any more specific than that. He's not making a vague claim, he made a clear and concrete claim. That's the point of Kalam. That's why it's said to prove the existence of God, because that's what it implies. But, you know what, I'll forgive you on this. You say you do not believe in Kalam as a good argument for God. So I'll forgive you on your ignorance of what Kalam, and particularly Craig in this instance, says.
He is just arguing everything needs a sufficient reason to begin to exist.
He starts from that in order to argue for God.
So your argument fails there. Secondly, the idea of something beginning to exist as caused by something independent of time has to do with something philosophers call ontological priority. God exists prior to time in that God's existence is necessary for the existence of the universe.
Something which was never proved by the argument, of course. And if it was, then you would have to agree that Craig is actually arguing for a specific cause. See how that works?
But the universe's existence is not necessary for God's existence.
Okay. It depends how you define universe, but okay. If the universe is just everything that exists, then it would be technically, yes, because you say God exists. Because there would be You need existence in order to exist first, of course. But go on.
Is also prior to time in that he exists without time. So these ideas do not mean that God actually exists at a time before time, nor does it mean that that there was a time when there was nothing. Actually,
what it means is it's completely useless in order to describe such things. They have no meaning, because you can't talk about it. There's no knowledge to be gained from it. It is a completely, utterly meaningless gibberish to talk about time before time, which is exactly which was Martymer's point. But hey.
this applies to anything that is caused of things simultaneously. Craigie likes to use the example of a chandelier being held up by a chain. The sufficient reason for the chandelier being held up is the chain holding it up. There's no need for a transition in time for this type of causality. This means your claim that this only applies to the universe is mistaken, no matter what we consider.
Okay. I'm not sure the analogy actually works in the way he says it does, but as in regards to simultaneous causation, that can only happen in a theory of time. But since we know that relativity is true, that implies a B theory of time. So, this is why William Craig argues against relativity, because it implies a B theory of time. Of course, he says that we know there's an A theory of time because there's a God. And since A theory of time works, at least according to him, then we know that Kalam is true. And because if we know Kalam is true, then we know that there is a God. Interesting. But yeah, that only has to work with an A theory of time. But we know B theory is correct because there is such a thing as relativity. And since B theory is most likely, at least according to empirical science, not only Dr. Craig's claims about science supporting Kalam is false, but also that any objection that he can try to say about time and simultaneous causes is also false, and therefore Kalam doesn't work. So thank you for listening, and remember, people, rationality is the path to righteousness.